Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back once again to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, if you're listening to me today and working in any industry, I suspect that when you need access to a certain form or a certain piece of information, you just end up wasting so much time searching for what should be an incredibly easy document. We store everything online now and on corporate intranets, but it often seems that everyone uploads them to different places, forgets to tag them, or forgot where they put them. And I recently read an interesting and yet predictable report that suggested that information management is actually damaging productivity. No surprise there. So when M-Files announced the new findings from their 2019 Global Intelligent Information Benchmark report, where they surveyed 1,500 office workers across global regions and revealed 82% of employees report poor information management is damaging productivity in the workplace, I thought to myself, at last, it's finally being recognised. And these findings indicate that many businesses manually store information and are just utilising outdated structures across a variety of disparate and often unintegrated systems. So I thought the findings of that report would make for a great talking point for today's episode. So I want to talk to Greg Milliken at M-Files and invite him onto the podcast about how information management is actually hindering productivity in the workplace and what actually can be done as a solution. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Texas so we can speak with Greg Milliken from M-Files, who's going to tell us all about this problem and, more importantly, the solution. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Greg Milliken, and I head up global marketing for a company called M-Files. That's M-Files, just like the word files. And what we're all about is helping companies manage and use information. That's often the documents they create, contracts, invoices, proposals, and that. And, so this is a big market where companies do that, but we have a very innovative way to do that. And we help do it in this unique way that really is all about putting information in context. And if you think about it, you create information, it's related to something, it's important to me for some reason. So we're all about helping solve that problem. And quite honestly, the technologies and the systems that have been doing that in the past haven't really been able to meet the increasingly complex and dynamic needs of the market. So that's what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. And like you say, that M-Files provides that intelligent information management platform that can help improve business performance by helping people find and ultimately use information much more effectively. But can you expand on that a little and help people listening that are just hearing about you for the first time understand how you provide businesses with value and equally the kind of problems that you help them solve?
Well, thinking of it simplistically is that the way most systems or businesses approach this problem is they have a place where they store their information. And that can be very simple. I mean, we're all familiar with folders in Windows and how we individually do it. And so for a moment, just think how you might do it versus somebody else. And invariably, two people will do that differently. They might think, hey, I'm going to make a contract folder, or I'm going to make a customer folder, or maybe I have a project folder, or whatever it might be. So generally, companies try to have a place where they say, go put the information there. And that increasingly becomes more sophisticated when you look at what we would call an ECM system, an enterprise content management system. And that name is changing. Gartner now calls it content services. But the idea is a system, a document management system would be a flavor of that. So that can get more sophisticated where companies have said, hey, let's go get a more powerful tool to do that. And that'll help us organize it better. And that'll help us make it secure and even maybe let us automate some processes. But the point is, what those were all about was people had to go put things in a place. And what I often say is that is completely subjective. If you take the example of you and another individual, we each have our own subjective ways we think about how we would do that. Well, that's how a business does it too. Even in the same industry, two businesses will probably say, well, we're going to do it that way and we're going to do it this way. And what happens there is now people have to guess where that stuff goes. And very often it goes in more than one place. You know, a contract is important to the legal folks because they have to make sure it's valid and it's active, but it might be important to somebody in sales because it's related to a customer. So does that go in the customer folder, or does it go in the date folder or impending contract sort of a thing? So the notion that has been an intractable problem, and invariably what it causes is a lack of precision. If you have to guess where something might go, generally people don't get that right. And what that's led to is no matter how sophisticated the system is, it's still difficult for people to find what they need. And what NBC has done is flipped that on its head and basically said, don't worry about where information goes. Just worry about describing it. Is it a contract? Is it related to this customer? So those are simple tags in kind of lay person's terms. You know, in a more jargony world and technology, we might call that metadata. But think of that. That's very intuitive. Everybody knows what they're working on. You know, if they don't know what they're working on, that's a bigger problem. You know, knowing where they should go store it in the company's system, that's a much harder problem. And as I said, most people get wrong. Well, if you eliminate that and you just allow people to say, hey, that's a contract, it's related to that customer, and you're done, you've now made it possible, without worrying about where you put it, for that information to be accessed dynamically in different ways. And then also comes from that precision. Because think, if people are generally getting it right, they're getting it right that it's a contract or that it's a proposal, because that's not hard. They know that. And they know that that contract is related to this project or this customer. From that precision comes accuracy. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of the core. Think of this. I'll leave you with one analogy on this point. Think of the old way we did music on the iPhone, or the folks who had iPhone. You'd put music on the device. You wouldn't put it in, well, I'm going to put this in the Al Green folder, or I'm going to put that in the Crusaders folder. You just put the music on the device. And then the device would determine, through metadata underneath, what that music was. And now you could consume it however you wanted. You could consume it like by genre or by album or by artist or by date, by playlist. Take that concept and generalize it to the business environment, and that's how we do it. We do it differently, and it's intuitive, and it's just way more powerful and dynamic.
Fantastic. And one of the reasons I invited you on today was after reading about the new findings from your 2019 Global Intelligent Information Management Benchmark Report, which surveyed 1,500 office workers across multiple global regions. And the results of that revealed 82% of employees report poor information management is actually damaging productivity in the workplace. I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about that survey? And did those results actually surprise you?
You know, we've really been, this has been something we've dedicated ourselves to doing, to constantly trying to keep a pulse on the market. And there's others who do this too, but we said, hey, we want to go out and do this survey ourselves. And I can't say we're 100% surprised. We're surprised by some of the stuff. And you know, things like many companies, a vast majority, still rely on, well, the shocking word, paper. You know, 66% of organizations are still trying to figure out how to reduce paper. I think that's even high. We may be low. We may be low on that one. But, you know, the notion that companies are dependent just on file shares. You know, when we say file share, we mean like a set of folders that are shared over the network, and people in the company can go store information in those. That's old school. That's like from 1980s. So we knew that was going on from our experience, because we've been selling in this market for years. We have, you know, close to 10,000 customers now around the world. So we hear these kind of things a lot. But the notion that 8 in 10 are still, really struggling. I mean, doesn't that sound kind of shocking in its own right? That here we are in all this greatest era of file sharing tools like Box and Dropbox and all these innovative technologies in the cloud, and 8 and 10 people have to recreate stuff all the time. I mean, that in its own right is shocking. And another area that comes into that is it's not just whether you have to recreate something, but how do you know that you really have the right thing if you're not recreating it? That gets into this whole history, this notion of managing the history and the versions. In companies, obviously if you're reviewing and approving something and editing and changing it, there will be different versions of it. You want to track it. But once you put it out there, you might still continue to change it, and then multiple people are editing it. We found that 91% of respondents in this survey were really having a hard time figuring out whether they had the most current version. Well, if you're in a business that has compliance or regulatory requirements, you better have the right version. So it's quite an endemic problem. And I would say maybe the part that shocked us was just really the breadth and the state of this, because this is not a totally new market where we just have these great technology. This has been going on since the 80s. Systems like Documentum, many of your listeners may not have heard that, but it's a kind of an old school system for managing information. That's been around for 30 plus years, and OpenText is another big player in this market. Similar. It's like we're stuck in the 1980s, quite honestly, with this technology. And I say that because that's when Apple introduced the desktop metaphor, folders, and then Microsoft jumped on it, of course. That's the world everybody's living in. And even if you have a more sophisticated system, like an ECM system or a document management system or a records management system, it all behaves kind of similarly. You go put it in this top-down rigid structure that the company has decided that we will follow, and it's not aligned necessarily with the individual behaviors and needs of the people who are doing the work. And I guess that's the underlying thing that we find really compelling about this. We said 8 and 10 have to recreate and find things. This version issue, there's just issues with naming. There's just all kind of elements below that for us, we just said, man, we really are surprised that the broader market is still in this state. But that's good for us, quite honestly, because we sell something to help with that.
I completely agree with what you say there. We're not at that paperless office area yet, which completely blows my mind for saying how much technology we all use. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the survey also revealed that many businesses manually store information utilizing outdated folder structures across a variety of disparate and often unintegrated systems. So I'm sure many people listening were going to be able to relate to everything that we're talking about. And stats such as 96% of all employees find some sort of difficulty when looking for the most recent version of a document or file will be unsurprising to many. I think we've all been there. But are businesses recognizing this as a problem and finally doing something about it?
I would answer that with a qualified yes. Here's an interesting stat. Literally, the survey found that only 24%, less than a quarter of businesses, are using let's say, document management system as the lowest common denominator, because they get more sophisticated from there. Document management is just, hey, help me organize the files and documents that I use and keep track of them and that sort of thing. So if only 24% are using that, that means, 76% are not using a structured system for doing that? Well, they're doing it in all kinds of different ways. They're storing it out on file shares. They're putting it in email attachments. They are using their own file sharing tools, and we see this as a very positive disruption to the market. The popularity of tools or services like Dropbox or Box, grew because that was something that helped people do what they needed to do that the corporate system just didn't do, or it might have done it, but it was way too complex to try to do it. So what's happening, we think, is because of the proliferation of these tools, the emergence of the cloud and different kinds of services that people can take advantage of, the pure explosion of information around all of that is just becoming unbearable. I mean, think of it. How much stuff just washes over the decks almost every day for everyone? And, you know, maybe that's kind of a little bit of hyperbole there, but the reality is the problem is becoming so significant. The amount of information, the variety of information, the different sources where that information comes from are just proving to be unmanageable. So the old ways of doing this are starting to break down. You know, just relying on a file share somewhere ain't working because we can't find the stuff and we need to hire more people and we don't have the budget to do that. Or wait a minute, we failed our last regulatory audit. Let's assume we're a life sciences company. Maybe we make medical devices, or maybe we're in the chemical space where things are very regulated. Well, when you run into that problem, you got a real serious problem because business can stop. And so another characteristic I think that people are trying to get their heads around is not just are they using maybe this tool or that tool to do it better, but they're wrestling with that stuff is ending up in a lot of different places. So they might do their contracts really well. They might have a system that helps their legal department do their contract management really well. But now all the contracts are off in that system, and other people are storing things in Box and on their desktop and in email. And what happens is these silos are created. And I think silos that very often people can get into, but think if you have a whole different interface for every one and you're changing that each time, you know, that's an experience we all go through. You know, you lose productivity by doing that. So in addition to the realization that companies have to manage information better, make it easier. So maybe it's 2 in 10 are struggling to find the right thing, not 8 in 10. At the same time, they're realizing that, wait a minute, we got a lot of these different places out here where we put stuff, where we've siloed information. We need to break those down, and we need to make that accessible. And think about that. If you follow that paradigm that we said initially, that it doesn't really matter where you store something, but what it is, that provides a clue to how you transcend and break down these silos. Because if you don't care where it is, you're just focused on the context and what it is and what it's related to help you establish that context, you now provide a pathway to finding the information that you need without necessarily worrying so much that, hey, we put it off in Box, or it's in SharePoint in our corporate site library, or if it's off in open text. So there is a lot of movement in this space, and it's quite exciting. And you throw in things like artificial intelligence to help solve this, and I think businesses are waking up to it. It's still 24% are using a system, so that means 76% are not. So there's a lot of ground to cover, but there's a lot of things happening. So it's quite an exciting space. It doesn't sound that exciting, you know, document management, content management. Sometimes it makes me a little bit bored sometimes from the name, but the reality is underneath, that's everything. I mean, really, finding the info you need when you need it gives you time to do everything else. And that's what we're all striving for.
Like you said, we did cover a lot of ground there about how information management is actually hindering productivity in the workplace. So naturally, the next question I've got to ask is, so what is the solution? How are you helping with that?
Well, you know, this is back to that, think of that iPhone example. The idea that if you could give people a tool where they simply could intuitively describe the information they're working with, and it doesn't have to be laborious. Imagine, hey, this is just a contract and it's related to this customer I'm working on. Boom. Don't think about anything else. Underneath the covers, that info might move off to a secure place where the company has decided, because of governance, where contracts reside. So, and they can prove that to an auditing authority or something like that. So think if that sort of thing is going on, that you make it very intuitive for the user, make it appealing to them because it's easy, and it might even work personally the way they want to work, while at the same time allowing the organization to meet its corporate needs and mandates. You know, being from the UK, this new thing about GDPR, how businesses manage, the general data protection regulation, the idea that, hey, if you have personal information about somebody, you need to secure that, and you need to, treat it correctly. You need to honor when people tell you not to communicate with them, et cetera, et cetera. Those are regulations that we all need to deal with. So what we have found, what we believe is the clue to that can be taken from, again, the popularity of the file sharing tools. If you give a tool that's flexible, a system that's flexible and dynamic to allow people to work the way they want, in other words, that somebody might want to look at their information organized this way and somebody else might want to look at it organized another way. If you do that while still correctly classifying it as a contract related to this customer, now the legal department can consume it the way they want, and this individual can consume it the way they want. So that's our key. We believe that the answer is user adoption. If you get people to use these tools, therein is the path to ROI, or return on investment. The corollary of that, if nobody's using it, guess what? Guaranteed no ROI. And that's what the challenge of some of these old school systems are. So we like to think of ourselves as bridging the gap between solving the complex problems, compliance, governance, process automation. That can just be simple approval workflows, or it could be some very sophisticated process for, submitting a new drug to the FDA in the U.S. in a pharmaceutical environment. But if you can meet those needs and allow people, you can solve those deep problems and then allow people to interact with the information they need in a simple, intuitive way, that's the clue. Now, somebody listening to this might say, well, gosh, okay, you say that, but, does it really do that? Well, we, like any business, are out there working with companies and trying to understand their needs better and show them. But I can tell you, when we go win in the market and we compete with everybody, we don't win because they know the name NBC. We win because we have an approach that is unique and it's different. And it's this notion of being dynamic and agile and allowing individuals and groups to work differently. Because think of this, I'll add one more point there. Where does innovation begin in a company? I would argue that it does not begin everywhere at once. It happens in certain pockets within the company. And some part of the company says, hey, we need to do this better. And they come up with an idea for how to do it. And they start to improve upon that. And then maybe that proves itself out, and then it gets broader and gets used. Now, interestingly, that's also one of the things that has created silos, because this group goes off and does their contracts, or accounting does their invoice processing, and now you have these different systems and information is getting siloed. But if you could break down the silos by allowing people to get access to information in these different systems, and you could also free up those groups who have innovative ideas to move forward and innovate sort of independent of the crowd, rather than saying, no, you got to do it the same way everybody else does. It's that sort of collection of sort of benefits and approach to the problem that we have found has really allowed us to be successful. Because said simply, NBC allows, say, that contract, that legal group, to change the way they look at the information and adapt to it, just like that iPhone. They're looking at it by genre, and they're processing it by genre, whereas somebody else in another group is wholly looking at the same information in a different way, the way that's most, intuitive to them. And that, I think, is really the key. Let people work the way they're most comfortable, something they see benefits them in their individual day-to-day work. And that's the path by which the organization at large meets their needs. So hopefully that was clear.
And something else I think we must point out here is Gartner recently said content service platforms are at the next stage of enterprise content management, representing a shift from those self-contained systems and repositories to open services. And the reason I mention that is because I also believe that Gartner has named M-Files as a visionary. So that must make you feel incredibly proud that you're on the right path and actually making a difference here.
Yeah, we take particular pride in that, basically because we think change and innovation typically comes from the edge. It comes from the people out there pushing a new vision or approach, not by those who have a lot to protect in the status quo. So we think that's really important and are proud of the fact that Gartner has classified us as a visionary. But you brought that up. I think I mentioned it earlier a little bit too, that Gartner has re-characterized, if you will, this market into something they call content services rather than enterprise content management. Now, between you and me and everybody listening, I think both of those terms are somewhat esoteric and technical. You don't find a lot of businesses going out saying, we need us some content services, but from Gartner's perspective, the idea is capturing some very important points. And like you said, it's moving away from maybe those monolithic silos of the past, the system, the enterprise content management system, the ECM system, the document management system, where you went and put stuff, to now a collection of services that deliver information to you as you need it. So, and those could be services that come from the cloud. They may be things that you have on premises in your environment. Very often it's hybrid. It's a mixture of the two. Some things are in the cloud and some things are on premises. That's a very interesting dynamic in this space. Certain markets have been very resistant to moving to the cloud, but the notion of content services encompasses both of those. It also encompasses, they use the term microservices, which it's not just one big monolithic service that helps you organize your content, but a variety of things. An example being artificial intelligence services. So imagine this. Take our system that's driven by these tags or metadata. You don't put it in a folder location or a place. You tag it. What if those tags could be automatically derived through artificial intelligence? And I'll tell you, that stuff is getting good. That's like jet fuel to our system. We always said this is like the Holy Grail. We already have the plumbing in place to drive the data dynamically and to deliver that iPhone-like experience. So now you apply technologies through these services, as Gartner would describe them, and now maybe you've got some big file share out of the network, or you've got some system, you apply that artificial intelligence and you automatically begin to determine, hey, this is a contract, or that's an invoice, or this is a proposal, or this is some kind of other important regulatory document we need to have. And now that begins to dynamically organize in different ways. Just think, it's not like it's changing off position. It's just out there. Quite honestly, when we look at something in a folder, it's not literally off in a place physically on your drive that's in a folder. It's just tagged in some way to be to a folder. So we've almost generalized what the systems have been masking and opened that to where now companies can get the power of that. And I don't know, I think Gartner's recharacterizing the name is also a indicator of this change I was speaking of earlier, that companies are realizing the old way ain't enough. It's not getting it done. It's a new time. Information can be anywhere. User expectations are different. We all have these iPhones and we know how sophisticated it can be. Mobile is critical along that line. You got to get information outside of the company. That this idea of security and compliance increasing, all impinging factors. And I think Gartner changing the name, quite honestly, is acknowledging that. So, the fact that we're a visionary in that space too, I would just come back to that and say, that's exciting for us to be there. And we're going to continue to push the envelope and show companies a new way to do this.
Now, there is a clear need for change in information management practices across all organisations, all industries of all sizes. But where do you begin to change the culture as well as the technology and eradicating that, but we've always done it this way mindset? I mean, you kind of hinted that at the beginning that some people just keep reverting back to their own way of doing things. How do you combat that?
Well, that's one of the harder things to do, I will say. Changing the company and the way people behave is difficult. They'll gravitate to what they know. But I think a clue to that is you allow the people who will do that to do it. And while not necessarily requiring everybody else to do it. In the old way, it was lockstep. Hey, we went to a new system. Guess what? Everyone's coming to training on the new system. Wait a minute, I like the old system. Sorry, come to training on the new system. That sort of top-down approach was kind of the way it happened. Well, imagine if, like I said, where innovation is occurring or where particular needs are happening, you can allow those groups to move forward while maybe allowing the less innovative to continue what they're doing until they begin to see the benefits themselves. And that's a real key to this approach, that we can go into a company that's already got big investments in existing tools, and some of them, and many of them, it's just often they're putting things in a file share. But let's say they've bought OpenText and they're using SharePoint quite widely, but they know it's not quite getting it done for them, and they really need to improve pick a use case. Let's say their invoice processing operation. Well, what we can do is we can allow that group that manages invoices to formulate a new process for doing that while reaching into these other systems and looking at the information and organizing it differently without changing or impacting the people who rely upon the existing system. That might be a little bit difficult to conceive of, but just think of it simplistically. If you've got Box, let's say a bunch of people got Box and they're all sharing files and they've all created different structures for how they want to store them and everybody's doing it their own way, that's a pretty challenging problem. But if you can go provide that accounting group a system that can crawl into Box and figure out where all the invoices are in that system and then organize them for the accounting department so they're looking at the invoices and they see them nicely related by customers, but the people in Box can still go in and access them in Box, you've now allowed the old group to kind of keep doing what they're doing. You've now allowed the new group to innovate, and you've created a proof path to pull those people along. I think of it like a business clutch. You let the part of the group that's turning that engine fast and you decouple them from maybe everybody else, let them advance, and then as they begin to see value and they can show, wow, look at what we're doing, then you let go of that clutch and the engine picks up and the rest of the organization begins to turn. And I'll tell you, that's what often happens in an in-files deployment. We will get in to an account, say, through the legal department, and suddenly the people in the accounting department or the HR department will see what the legal department's doing, and they'll say, wow, man, that's a lot better way to do that. And now it expands. So I would just say the way you do that is you focus on allowing people to work the way they need to work. So it's a focus on the person and the individual and really paying attention to that. Yeah, we're not just talking about the user interface, but these concepts, hey, I'm defining this to be a contract, or I'm defining this to be an invoice. You focus on that simplicity for the user. That in its own right is going to be attractive to people, from some, rigid, technologically bound system that they've been having to use. But at the same time, letting some of those people move faster than the others, that's a key. That's how you change, we think, behavior overall. And that's kind of a pattern that we've seen over our 10,000 customers.
And if we just flip back to the survey just for a moment, I'm curious, did the findings reveal any trends around any particular industries or geographical regions, or is it a problem just affecting all of them?
No, that's interesting that we did see a lot of variation. And as you said, we did it to 1,500 companies out in across the world. I think 9 countries we did it in. Bear in mind, we're a European company at our origins. We come out of the Nordics and Finland, and I started our business in the U.S. back in 2009. But in this survey, I mentioned that only 25% or 24% actually of companies that we surveyed indicated they were using a purpose-built document management or ECM system. But as you might expect, the Nordics were way ahead on that. Switzerland was way ahead. Now, interestingly, Switzerland, you think of it as a small country. Yes, it's in the center of Europe, and we all know it as having maybe a lot of money in that. But man, we've just got a cranking market in Switzerland and the Nordic region as well. So I guess that would speak to their early adopters in that technology. The U.S. is lower, only 22%, so below the 24%. We found that 4 out of 5 users, okay, maybe this isn't the most surprising thing. 4 out of 5 users worldwide need to access their documents or information on a mobile device. We all know how easy it's getting if you can do that. But Sweden, the UK, the US are leading in that area. Finland is at 91%. So not just 4 out of 5, 91%. So I think that ties into technology and internet connectivity, and all of that is very high in the Nordic regions. But Germany is an interesting challenge. They are both resistant to things like the cloud, but they're also very accepting of technology and how that's applied. So that's an interesting case, that you find one of the most evolved ECM or document management markets in the world in Germany. There's, maybe 20 plus German ECM companies, many of names you might not have heard, but it's all in German. It's all focused on that market and all of that, but it's a much, much lower percentage that are in the cloud. They have privacy concerns, they have challenges. So yeah, some very interesting variations across that. Use of personal devices. I mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, the idea of, shadow IT or file sharing accounts coming into use. The highest we found there is in Sweden. Almost 7 out of 10 are using their own personal devices and file sharing accounts. Interestingly, the lowest was in Australia and New Zealand, with only 5 in 10 using personal devices or their own file sharing accounts. Now that's interesting because we have a thriving market in Australia too. It's quite an exciting market, but some of the needs there are maybe more around just the traditional organizing and processing of information, and maybe it's pushing the envelope of cloud-based file sharing. But some very interesting differences across geos, and we're kind of having to contend with all of those because we're active in all those markets.
So I've got to ask, what's next for M-Files? And is there anything that particularly excites you about the future and the road ahead? Listening to your conversation now, I would imagine that artificial intelligence and that jet fuel that it could provide, that's going to be the big thing for you, isn't it?
Exactly. It is really, we acquired a Canadian company last year that was all focused on natural language processing and even what they would describe as natural language understanding. There's these technologies in AI, that some of them are what we would call text analytics. It goes in and it analyzes the text in the document. So in that case, if the customer name is mentioned, it might be easy to find, hey, that document's related to this customer. Or if it says this is a contract, you can determine that. But what if it doesn't use those actual words? And you have to understand the natural language that's being used. That's a huge area of study in advance and something that we're really leveraging. So yes, like I said, it's jet fuel to our engine. We're wired for that. If all of that happened automatically, and I'm telling you, that is not far away. And we're not talking perfection here. These algorithms are changing and advancing, but if you were getting 98% of it, think of the impact that would have. Nobody had to guess what folder or system to put things in. and information was being automatically organized where it came up. So yes, AI is key, but here's another thing. We talk about context as the most important thing, putting information in context, because even the same piece of information's context can change over time. I mean, think when you're reviewing and editing a document, you might only want some people to see it, a limited audience, but once it's been approved, you want a lot more people to see it. So just understanding what drives the need for content to be available and be accessible to people. So we've opened up our architecture to where we can now connect into these other systems. So we're unifying those silos we talked about and creating kind of an intelligent layer that spans both data that's in our own system, because we have our own repository, but information that's often other systems. But the next stage is, what if mFiles as a user interface even went away? Now the way you do that is right inside Salesforce or in Office 365. So the notion that you're not context switching, so if I'm in Salesforce and I'm a sales guy and I'm using that every day, why do I have to move off to mFiles or OpenText or something else to find the information that I need? We believe you wouldn't have to do that if you can embed this capability within the user interfaces and ecosystems of other core platforms, Salesforce, Office 365, and SharePoint Online, Google Drive, and Google Docs. That's another real exciting area for us. So we're putting a lot of energy into that.
Excellent. Now, we have covered a lot of ground today, and we've talked about the report as well. So can you just remind the listeners of where they can find you online, maybe download a copy of the report, and also just reach out and contact a member of your team if they have any other questions?
Sure. Well, you just come to mfiles.com, and that's M as in Mary -files, FILES.com, and you'll find our site, and right on there, there's a set of resources, and you can get right to this report. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So just going on there and searching on M-Files, you'll find us. And there's folks interacting there. So even if you didn't find exactly what you wanted, a chat will pop up, or you can log a question on Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that, and we'll be right on it. So that's accessible to you. Come visit the site, check it out, learn a little bit about what we do. Lots of folks happy to answer questions, and would just enjoy the discussion. So would welcome people to follow up if this is at all raise their interest in this topic.
Well, I think every problem that we've discussed today, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say 95% of everyone listening have encountered each and every one of those. So the fact that you've created this next generation intelligent information management platform that actually just improves business performance by helping people find and use the information that they're searching for more effectively, I think it's a fantastic thing. So a big thank you for coming on and sharing that story with me today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Neil. I really appreciated the time and enjoyed the discussion.
There were some pretty big stats in that conversation there. I mean, 96% of all employees face some sort of difficulty when looking for the most recent version of a document or file. And also 42% cited challenges with improper or incorrect labelling of documents. And 41% reported that information was frequently stored in the incorrect folder or incorrect system, with many finding that information was just simply misplaced or lost. And finally, 82% of employees report poor information management is actually damaging productivity in the workplace. But here's the thing, this should be of no surprise because each and every one of us has experienced this. We've all emailed the guy that's been at a company for 10, 15 years just to find out where something might be, or where something might be stored in an email or somebody's subfolder somewhere. But it doesn't always have to be that way, and for that reason, I like how mFiles is providing this next generation intelligent information platform that actually improves business performance by helping people just find and use information more effectively. And like I said, we've all experienced traditional enterprise content management systems or content service platforms and the problems around them. And on the surface, it is not a subject that's very sexy, but it is a crucial one. And MFiles appears to be attempting to unify these systems, the data and content, across an entire organisation without disturbing systems and processes or requiring any data migration. So from a tech standpoint, artificial intelligence technologies and in its unique intelligent metadata layer is helping MFiles break down silos by delivering a context experience for accessing and leveraging information that resides in any system and repository. And I can completely see why AI is going to be the jet fuel behind this. Food for thought indeed. And I'm curious, is this a problem where you work? And what are you trying to do differently to solve that poor information management problem that is damaging productivity in the workplace? Please share your stories and your solutions and your thoughts about today's conversation by simply emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Twitter and Instagram is just @NeilCHughes. And of course, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk if you need my help with anything else. So let's try and right a few wrongs by simply working together and sharing ideas and sharing our own experiences. But that's it for today. So report back by tomorrow morning with your findings. But right now, it's class dismissed. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.